All right. What's up, guys? I hope you're doing well. James here from jamesdforsythe.com. So I wanted to take a minute to go over a book that really kind of added some context to some of the stuff that I've already learned in like my US history classes and stuff in high school and college and that sort of thing. At least the basic history. And it kind of goes along with the history of banking and the monetary system in general, right? And it really gets into the weeds. Um, I don't want to say it really gets into the weeds. It gets into the parts in which you typically don't tread on in history, right? And it's written by Murray and Rothbard. It's the origins of the Federal Reserve, and really kind of puts it in the Federal Reserve context, right? With that being said, the reason I chose this book, here is the cover, by the way. But the reason I chose this book to read, for one, was because Rothbard is well cited in some of the other books that I've read about the Federal Reserve, and so I've all about reading all the other points of view, including one called Crozier. Haven't read him yet, but I've at least got the book, and then Warburg as well. And I've been steadily doing videos on Warburg's book for the origins of the Federal Reserve as well. But the reason I liked this book was he actually kind of, I guess, symbolizes is a way to put it, but he really gives the alternate point of view or a different perspective of the Federal Reserve than Warburg does. Warburg really gives the makes the Federal Reserve out to be some godsend great thing for the country, for the United States. Whereas Rothbard, on the other hand, is kind of more of the whole, no, it's more of a Leviathan, which I believe he actually does explicitly use in the last sentence of the little summary on the back of the book. To achieve the Leviathan state, interests seeking special privilege and intellectuals offering scholarship and ideology must work hand in hand. And so it really kind of goes into it doesn't go in depth because, granted, if you look, it's barely 100 pages, but it really kind of at least opens the window, we'll say, to kind of give the basics and kind of superficial knowledge of that part of history, specifically like the late 1800s to early 1900s, going into like the Gold Standard Act of 1900 and that sort of thing. How basically bimetallism was used as he puts monetary imperialism, right? Especially for Latin America. And that's kind of where it ties into the history classes and stuff like that. Is we know from those history classes that basically something like the Monroe Doctrine and that sort of thing is the United States had a very large presence, we'll say, especially during this time in Latin and South America, right? And so basically he gives another point of view to where someone by the name of Conant basically used like the gold exchange standard and that sort of thing to basically monopolize and kind of, it's almost like he extracted some of the actual valuable currency from the places and sometimes actually explicitly taking away their official legal tender and basically putting their own in a certain way. Again, specific examples, I'll leave the book open for that. But to kind of show what I mean, right? And this whole kind of idea of, we'll say, monetary imperialism. And so he says the idea that capitalism in the developed countries was overproducing, not simply in the sense that purchasing power was needed, that more purchasing power was needed in recessions, but more deeply, and that the rate of profit was therefore inevitably falling, right? And it goes into arguments of like surplus capital and that sort of thing. And so basically, new and expanded foreign markets would increase profits, at least temporarily, while investments in undeveloped countries would be bound to bring a high rate of profit, hence to save advanced capitalism. It was necessary for Western governments to engage in outright imperialist or neo-imperialist ventures, which would force other countries to open their markets for American products and would force open investment opportunities abroad. Right? And he gives footnotes about like late stages, quote unquote, of capitalism, kind of really getting into the Marxist route, and where you have that late stage capitalism before basically Marxism takes hold in a way, right? And so also to give kind of credence to what they thought about the people of these said countries. He quotes I believe it's a magazine called The Investor. Basically, in quotes, the logical path to be pursued in that of the development of the natural riches of the tropical countries, Latin America and such. These countries are now peopled by races incapable of their own initiative of extracting its full riches from their own soil, and kind of starts to go down that route, as you can tell, about how they're going to bring on new modern machinery, methods of culture and agriculture, mineral resources, whatever, right? So that kind of gives that side of the argument of what he was kind of against, per se. But yeah, basically he goes into that sort of thing. He gives, just kind of breezing through it, kind of gives a different side of the story on the actual like kind of construction of the Federal Reserve Act. And so basically he attributes it more to, say, a little bit earlier, right? So it talks about the Fowler Bill, just like Warburg does, but in a slightly different context. And basically was attributing it seems the creation of the Federal Reserve, or at least kind of pushing the idea that the act needs to be made, right? So kind of like we talked about this quite a bit with Warburg, and basically the whole kind of legitimate propaganda kind of campaign that was used. And that's not me making up the words. It's like explicitly taking Warburg's words, right? And so it's like the words from the horse's mouth itself, right? And so basically that Rothbard seems to take it as the whole Jacob Schiff route, or as Warburg was like, oh, it's my idea sort of thing, more or less, right? Or he was kind of known as like the father of the Federal Reserve in that respect. And that's kind of the differences in opinion, I guess, on how the Federal Reserve was actually kind of started, or how society was kind of primed to move from decentralized banking into centralized, right? And like he goes further in depth with like the actual we'll say background of major players and the whole kind of drafting of the Federal Reserve Act, and also the Aldrich Bill, that kind of group of characters, talking about who they're connected to, Rockefeller or Morgan, that sort of thing. Again, not really given any opinion on that side of the argument because that requires a lot more research. But one thing that I did enjoy, and I may have stated earlier too, but Rothbard actually quotes Warburg and cites him directly. And so even though he has an alternate point of view, he's still citing him, which I think gives some, credence to his argument, or at least to him. And it makes me want to read more of his work, right? The fact that he's willing to cite the opposite side in a way, right? And so kind of with that aside, it's definitely a short read. Like I said, it's barely over 100 pages. Like the last page, the conclusion is on page 103. Like doesn't take very long at all. And I kind of wanted to let it sit for a bit before I try to do one of these videos on it, just to kind of mull it over, because it is one of those kind of books. But anyways, I'm going to leave that one here. So I hope you guys have a good night, and I will see you on the next one.